Hello everyone, today we're going to be thinking about how magic was used for healing in the Tudor period. Those of you who don't know me, my name's Anna and I'm doing a PhD in Tudor history, and I specifically am interested in Tudor belief and culture. In my previous video I talked about how both men and women fairly equally, we now think, were doing magic or cunning during the Tudor period. However, when we think of healing, traditionally women have kind of been mythologized as the main healers, the ones who are using all the maybe folk remedies and herbs, whereas men were doing, let's say, proper medicine. This again is unfair to both sides. Men were doing the proper medicine, but they were also involved in this magical healing. At the same time, there's evidence that women were involved in both the kind of more magical side of medicine and also the type of techniques that would have been taken on by traditional physicians at the time. So it's kind of unfair to both sides in a way. Now, in theory, you had to be licensed to practice healing or medicine of some kind. You could be licensed by the bishops, you could be licensed by the College of Physicians, or by one of the two universities, Oxford and Cambridge. However, it's my understanding that you could technically practice medicine as long as you weren't charging for it. There were certainly a lot of medical books out at the time that are directed at kind of the common man rather than traditional doctors as such. However, we do know that these cunning folk were obviously making a living from this and therefore could get in trouble. However, of the 1,203 cases of witchcraft that were recorded in Essex between 1560 and 1689, only actually 6 of those involved healing. And only 2 of those healers were women. So technically you could be called up for it if you were charging for it, but it doesn't seem to have happened that often. Now, if you were sick in the 16th century, if you could afford a more traditional doctor or physician, you might have called on them. You might have called on a barber surgeon, you might have called on a priest, or you might certainly have called on a cunning man or woman, although there is some evidence that this might have been seen as a bit of a last resort. Although conversely, some people would say because medicine was so inaccurate, think about the bloodletting, you might actually prefer to go to somebody who practices magic and medicine combined. There is even some evidence that some doctors, properly trained physicians, might have used some spells or charm work in their own books, particularly at the end of the medieval period. There's evidence in their notebooks. Now, magic and healing was very much combined with religion at this time, and it reflected the old kind of belief. The Christian church had curative powers, think exorcism. So illness was something that needed to be exorcised out of the body. Disease was like a foreign presence. Healing charms typically used a short verbal formula, usually a religious one, and employs gestures such as the sign of the cross, short religious stories, and sometimes names or figures. For example, there's a charm here for if you had been burnt, and it says, "There came 2 angels of the west. The one brought fire, the other brought frost. Take out the fire, put in the frost, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost." Not the catchiest of rhymes, but sometimes the vowels were a bit different there, and it might be that it would have rhymed a little bit better than it does now. And charms like this might have been used alongside amulets that maybe had inscriptions on them. The most typical thing that a cunning woman might do would be to use 5 paternosters, 5 Ave Marias, and a credo, or the Lord's Prayer often gets used quite a lot as well. So we see a real combination of kind of maybe a chant, maybe a talisman or an amulet alongside prayer, and maybe herbs and ointments too. So we've got an example here of a lady called Margaret Hunt in 1528, and she described her method. So first she would find out the name of the sick person. She would then kneel and pray to the Blessed Trinity, instruct the sick person to say 5 paternosters, 3 Ave Marias, 3 creeds, and do that for 9 nights, and then prescribe particular herbs depending on the ailment. So prayer was almost like a type of prescription. Sometimes the herbs would be disposed of entirely and they would just rely on prayer. And that then meant if they were accused of something, they could just simply say they were helping people to pray. And sort of go back to the exorcism analogy, in cases of things such as ringworm, they might command the parasite to be gone in the name of the Father, Son and the Holy Ghost before then applying some ointment. Sometimes prayers weren't always said aloud, but they might have been written and hung about the person's neck. This was also sometimes used to heal animals, which I'll come on to in just a moment. William Lilly, who was actually a bit later in the 17th century, recorded the following chant for toothache, which I really like. And this was to be written 3 times, spoken aloud, and then the written bit to be burnt. And it simply said, "Jesus Christ, for mercy's sake, take away this toothache." So, as I said, it wasn't just healing people that magic could be used for. It could also be used to heal and care for animals. So people and animals could both be diagnosed by being haunted by a spirit or a fairy or being bewitched, and it would take a cunning man or woman to fix this. One example of curing an animal, 1527, there was a man called William Brown, and he's in the court records for using herbs alongside the Lord's Prayer and the symbols of the Apostle to cure a horse from a disease called the fashions. I wasn't entirely sure what fashions is. All of my books let me down on that one, but a friend of mine who knows a lot about horses and the Tudors suggested that it could be fasciitis, which is the swelling of the joints. I'll tag her down below in case you want to check out her work, although it's not actually about horses. Maybe it should be. I'll let her know. So there you go, that is healing magic in the Tudor period. In my next video we're going to be thinking about the power of the healing touch. If you'd like even more on Tudor magic and witchcraft, head over to my Patreon, patreon.com/Tudor Tales, where we have a book club at the moment and some extra videos. Until then, have a magical day.